But I mean, I saw the film Wheeler Hall at Berkeley at least once, I thought twice, in different versions. I mean, you know, like it just kept cutting, and we had very many Nicholas Ray retrospectives to sort of like give him money, which was great for everybody there. And so, did you feel that it was going through different versions, or that it was just like interminably going to keep going, or what?
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, Charlie, but Berkeley and San Francisco happened after the Cannes Film Festival.
Right, yeah.
So the Cannes Film Festival was a great disappointment. I mean, you know, what you saw today, I wasn't here for the film, but that's what was shown at Cannes, and, you know, you can imagine.
Right, go ahead. What I think is very important to understand when you see We Can't Go Home Again was that, one, it was the very first time that Nick, because we were not in France, that Nick actually got to see any even glimpse of his vision put together. So it was like a first cut. And he never got a chance really ever to perfect what was just a rough cut. And remember, it was just a presentation at the most affordable way that he could manage it, to get it on one piece of film, to show people who were interested in him the potential of what it could be, in an effort to get money to finish it properly. So what you saw 2 movies ago was an extremely raw first cut.
I have a DVD at home, but I saw it on the big screen, and I don't think it's a felt movie at all. I found it highly watchable, terribly intriguing, and very commercial. I think it's a timepiece. I came to America in 1966 from Paris, France, and I felt he was filming what I felt. I felt very insecure. Here I come, and I was in total cultural shock. I thought speaking English and knowing American literature a bit, that I would love California, and it was terrible. And here is a country, I was marrying Samuel Fuller, and here was a country I was supposed to adopt as my homeland, and I saw people dying of drugs all around me. The amount of friends I lost was staggering. I felt very insecure. I felt like a bottomless pit. On top of it, I had some women who dragged me down to Long Beach to the VA hospital to visit the Vietnam soldiers who came back without arms and legs as cripples. And I had to bake cookies and bring it to them and say, here, have a cookie. My name is Christa Fuller. I'm married to Samuel Fuller. I'm an actress, a director who did blah, blah, blah movie. And one day, a veteran got up. I think I went with Marsha Hunt, Noreen Siegel. Noreen Nash was in a Jean Renoir movie, and The Wife of a Doctor. A bunch of very, very intelligent, wonderful women. But don't forget, I'm European, and I go down there, and I have to feel guilty. And the horror stories I heard of, those poor boys coming back from Vietnam. And one day, I put cookies next to one of the soldiers, and he got up and furiously looked at me and he said, I don't want your cookies, I want you. I had nightmares for decades to come. I still think about it. Don't forget, I'm born right in the middle of World War II in Germany, and in towns that were destroyed, and I didn't have a father. He came home when I was 4 years old. He was a prisoner of war of the Russians. So all of that made me even more insecure of living, you know what I mean? And plus I was married to a rebel, like comparable a bit to Nick, called Samuel Fuller. It was a terrible time. I mean, Now I look back at it and I said, I survived, you know. And I found the piece, I saw the Nick Ray film as watchable as Godard's socialism.
First of all, just to be clear, if I'd never been born, this film would have been made, okay? I met Nick in 1977 in New York, and I saw about 10 minutes of it at the First Avenue screening room. Does anyone remember the First Avenue screening room? No. You heard about it.
Yeah.
And I never forgot it. I never forgot what I saw. I was able to describe when somebody was doing Peace for Sight and Sound, called me up and was talking about the famous tomato scene. I was able to describe it better than he had. You'd just seen it. It was burned into my mind, you know? And I've never seen anything like that. And it began a sort of thing about unfinished films for me. But this is not, you know, I would not go around describing this as an unfinished film or a failure.
No.
Yeah, it's what, who was it, Archibald MacLeish said, poems are not finished, they're abandoned. Yeah, okay, this is a poem that was abandoned. I think it's one of his best
Maybe it
films.
should be called Rebel with a Cause, because you really feel the kids had a cause to rebel.
So, wow, this is the best version I've ever seen of this film, and I just want to give you some feedback of what I see in this vision. I don't know how you guys did it, but first of all most of the solarized transitions really work now because you pulled out a lot of dialogue, you put in sound, and then things become transcendent. There's still bonehead moments because it just happened that way, but now the parts between them are remarkable. And the multi-screen is very non-June Pak, and it's always emotionally, 90% emotionally expressive. And there's an incredible scene that shows you how Nick thinks. First of all, he flirts with men and women alike, so you see how he brings it out of people. And the sequence over his shoulder in the two shots between him and Leslie, where she's terrible and then she gets it, and she sinks into the anti-candy that he'd always planned. Amazing. And your best scene is when you have the cop thing. And it's very, very beautiful. And the sound effects and Susie's music, it's just an incredible film. And I'm sorry you didn't get to see this version of it.
Let me just ask a question. What is all the stuff with Tom and Leslie stealing the whatever out of the office and the Keystone Cops and all that? What was that? I had thought it was a film within the film that you guys were making. Susan told me it was just Leslie stealing the money from the office for whatever purpose, I don't know. I think she's going to go out and prostitute herself to get $2,000 to make the movie. I'm not quite sure why she would do a thing like that. I sent it to Tom to read my piece, where I referred to it as that. He didn't correct me. Will somebody solve it for me? What is it?
I just think it represents Nick's complete disdain for authority and the police. He really, especially if you think of it, this is the time of the Vietnam War and protesters and all that, and police were beating up on kids. We had a real disdain for authority and particularly the police. So it's just a way of making them look ridiculous.
Well, I understand all of that, but what's going on there? What's the purpose of all that?
I mean, how does that connect to a story?
Yeah. Each section of this has its own.
I don't know. I think I think there was something operating there. Something about identity. Something about putting on a cop uniform. Something about taking on the role of an authority figure, even though you were anti-authority or something. Something gets mixed up. Something's mixed up about being so scared of being new and rebellious that sometimes you revert to your oppressor or something. I don't know if you know what I mean, but
you and Jane are swimming in the pool, and Tom comes and chases you out. Very, very. Tom is always irascible, but I thought, by the way, when you were just to switch from asking questions, that when you all are in the pool and you're drowning her and it's solarized, remind me totally of Ce qui peut la vie, Every Man for Himself, when Depardieu grabs Isabelle Huppert and crushes a table with her. Violence of men against women. And also, I'll just say that Leslie's in a big scene where he's got his back to camera and she's talking. Godard used that shot many times in the next decade. It's a Godard shot, but it was a Nick Ray shot at that point. And of course, we all know that Godard made a multiple-screen film after seeing this. He always followed what Nick did.
I like the scene where Tom Farrell is shaving his beard after Richard Nixon wins. And I love the way he expresses his rebellion against his father, and yet he says how much he loves his father. I was very moved. I don't know if you were moved.
Were you, when you guys were first working with him, was he screening his own films as well? So you were seeing Nick Ray retrospectives and he was talking about his films as well, or what?
Charlie? When I first met Nick, he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I want to make films, and I actually wanted to do avant-garde films, my own, kind of introverted films. But I really loved editing, and he got me all this footage from the Chicago riots, the stuff that you see up on the screen in the multiple image, and he had me edit, and I was so excited because I was pretty politically involved at the time, and it was so exciting to work with Jerry Rubin and all those guys, and it was he just kind of took me in immediately. By assigning me to straighten out all the footage from the Chicago. And there was a lot of it. I mean, these were big reels of film, 16 millimeter film that he shot, and material that was also gotten from the TV stations. There's an incredible archive of, Chicago riot, Chicago era footage. We used some of that in the multiple image. We cut that stuff out and put it onto a projector and orchestrated. Well, Nick orchestrated the multiple image, and we projected 6 projectors onto a translucent screen in Hollywood, and then there was a 35 millimeter camera in front photographing this. And if you don't think that the film that we were running through the projector didn't have, it had hundreds of splices in it and would trip up in the frame, so we would have to redo. And, a lot of the stuff was kind of like what Nick says, is, film is a happening. And these sessions were happening, right, Charlie?
Oh God, yes, it was very hit and miss. Specific to your question, I think for a man that was as egotistical as Nick could be, he was very low-key to the students about his movies. I think at best he presupposed that you had seen his pictures. I know I had. When I came to him from outside, I had seen the bulk of his films, so I approached him that way. But I think most of the students hadn't. And he only had a TV print of They Live by Night, It said CNC. We didn't even have the RKO logo on it. It said CNC Cola, and it didn't have that beautiful prologue where this boy and this girl were never properly introduced to the world in order to tell their story. RKO presents. It didn't have that. It just said CNC Cola, CNC Cola, They Live by Night. Went right to that. It was a TV print, and that was the only film that he really ever screened for us.
Well, we had a class, an analysis of film before Nick came, and we had seen They Live by Night, I'm not kidding, 20 times. And we had an amazing professor, Ken Jacobs, who would use a projector that would go backwards and forwards. He would analyze the cuts, analyze the composition, analyze the family, the people that he never met, all of a sudden we're in this story of They Live by Night. And by the way, you've got to see this film if you haven't seen They Live by Night. It's a great film. Yeah. And so I never heard of Nick Ray, but I knew this one film, which I had seen 20 times. And all the kids saw it, all the students saw it. So we really didn't know that much about him.
Where'd you get the black and white footage from Johnny Guitar? Where'd you get the black and white from Johnny Guitar? You got...
Yeah, somehow we had the Johnny Guitar footage. The shot of Ben Cooper when he gets shot and all that. I mean, I don't know.
And also, and what's his name?
Scott
Turkey
Brady.
And Scott Brady.
Scott Brady, yeah. I didn't know.
When Leslie says, you must have a lot of money, you see Scott Brady getting drilled right through the head by Emma. Huh?
It looks as if it was filmed off a TV set. I mean,
I think
it's black and white. Yeah.
Yeah. We had a print of it and we just shot off the screen.
Did you know that Nick Ray wrote a beautiful eulogy for Jean Renoir when he passed away, and asked my husband to deliver it to the DGA, which he did?
But the experience of making it, it was, I think it was like maybe 2 days. I mean, it seemed to go on forever. I mean, it felt like it was a 48-hour straight shoot, what happened was that there was no electricity into the barn, so we had a generator going. So that's the reason that there's no sound there, is because there was always a gas generator running. I remember feeling very frightened about this scene because it looked as if Nick was actually going to hurt himself or even hang himself. And that's the one thing that I remember distinctly about that whole mood. There was something that felt like that was coming apart at that point. It was the exhaustion and all that. But then again, we have to counteract that incredible speech that he gives at the end of the film, which is, take care of each other against the dams and the goddams. I mean, what can I say?
I was supposed to shoot that sequence. I was the cameraman for that day, and Nick wanted to. This was a barn that was right outside of his house in the outskirts of Binghamton, New York, in a town called Vestal, and he wanted everybody to grab some straw and throw it up in the air to diffuse the light, and it really created a very nice pattern. Unfortunately, I discovered that I had hay fever and I couldn't breathe. And so I had to be, I had to be taken out and substituted. So I did not shoot that. Reliving the experience of being with Nick was an extraordinary experience. And I am grateful, very grateful for having it, and I really feel like on some level I really owe my career to Nick, because he got me interested in the whole editing process, because as I said, after I had gotten hay fever and I couldn't be the cameraman anymore, and I naturally kind of gravitated to the editing room, and that was the one place where you could be sort of free from the insanity of the set, and it was kind of dark and warm, and because remember, this is upstate New York where it's cold a lot, it was dark, and it was warm, and it was comfortable, and you pretty much, you got to be with Nick pretty much by yourself or with just a couple of other people, and at least if you were lucky, a third of the time he was incredibly lucid and brilliant, and it was just fabulous. So that made me want to be an editor, and so to that I really feel blessed.
Lindsay.
I was wondering if you could talk about the ways in which, what I was so struck by is how in the frame there are all of the smaller pictures, and then there are different parts of the frame, and then there's that border around that keeps changing. I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about some of the choices to do that at all. I know that it came up in the documentary about wanting to break through, but how do you choose how these things are positioned, or what's going in the background, or even the size of the pictures, or even when you're filming too, did that come up, like we're going to shoot this particular scene with this kind of film stock, or is it just based on what you guys had?
You want to attempt that one?
I think that we did run rehearsals back east with the multiple image. So Nick had an idea of what he wanted to surround a main scene in a multiple image. There was also the cast multiple image, which has just the cast. So that's pretty simple. But in terms of the other stuff, I actually think Nick knew what he wanted, but couldn't always get it because of the shortcomings of the technology that we were working on with, film projectors and 8mm film and broken splices and that kind of thing. Really.
No, I think that for the background mat of it all, we had access to an old Army Mitchell camera, and he just had us shoot images around the college campus or with the barn where he was. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. We really had no idea. And so we shot all this stuff, and then he kind of created the mats to be able to frame all this within.
Yeah, the mats around there are the locations on the campus, yeah, for the most part.
Still, right? Still or film?
No, film.
Usually when these kind of multi-projection ventures are undertaken, and you have a camera that's trying to capture the images from all these different projections, they have to be synchronized so that the shutter open on each of the projectors is matching the shutter open on the camera. Otherwise you get strobing and you get flicker, and I didn't see any of that in this case. Is that just due to the recreation in this?
Well, we had a very good cameraman to organize all this, but I don't think anything was properly synchronized. It was very haphazard. It was just, we lined up 5 or 6 projectors. We did it a bunch of times, and it was properly leadered out. Each projector was leadered out for when you actually were going to be showing the image, and if you were into, I don't even think we could afford black leaders, so there might have been white leader there. We were covering the projector lens, and maybe there would be times that Nick would say, okay, zoom, we might have had control over the projector lens, and you could zoom it in or out or throw it out of focus. It was all completely spontaneous.
That's absolutely not supposed to work. Cameras and projectors both have a 50-50 dark and light cycle.
It was very funky. It was very funky. And the thing is that if Nick were alive today and somebody gave him a pile of money, we would have done, I guarantee you, we would have done this properly. We would have done it in an Avid. We would have cut really interesting mats and thrown them a little out of focus. It would not have looked like this.
What I'm saying is that it worked.
Well, they said that some of this went on for a year, or were the main crew or most of the students all stayed with it for that year, or in the course that you were taking, how many stayed on? Did people, drop out, or?
Well, there were people that dropped out after a year. After the first year, they didn't want to deal with this anymore. I mean, here was a guy that came in like a thunder, rolling thunder.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big event, and we were studying avant-garde movies. Little individual people making their little, avant-garde films of, beautiful films of, leaves falling from the trees. I mean, here comes a guy with all this footage from, the 60s, and with the confrontation and the where are we now, and all this emotion. I mean, he stirred up a lot. So a lot of people dropped out for one reason or another. Some had to, get their degrees.
Yeah.
But there was a core group. I was there the whole time.
Which was how long?
About 2.5 years, Charlie.
Well, Nick was his he was there for 2 years, but kind of dragged on well beyond that. Yeah, by the time you were in California with Walter Murch, that would have been 2.5 years.
Right. So about 3 years, but this was on the West Coast. So at Harper, it was just 2 years, and a lot of people dropped out, but a number of people stayed.
Dare I repeat the LSD question that was posed? Did Nick join the generation, that youthful generation, psychotropically also, as well as join with them as mentor and teacher?
I don't know about that.
Okay.
Truth. I never saw it. What, LSD?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
That I saw.
So can you talk about the process that got it to this edit? I guess you were involved working on it?
Yeah, Susan approached me. She had people that were interested. A museum in the Netherlands wanted to restore this film. So what happened was we she wanted the original 1973 version restored. How we were going to restore it was the question. Could we go back to the original film footage and actually redo the multiple image with the original footage? And as it turned out, with the original footage, and as it turned out, we couldn't, because there was a lot of footage that was missing. And it would have been a very difficult task to match with real film what you see on this 35mm mat. So it was decided that we were to just restore the sound and the image of the 35mm. During this time, we were also going over all of the tapes from the Chicago conspiracy era, and all of the tapes of Nick teaching, all the audio tapes, all the footage. So there was, hundreds of hours of audio and film material that are not in the film. So the process involved not only restoring the film, but organizing the archive.
I just want to say you have to appreciate that after Cannes, and you had that 35mm interlock, separate picture, separate track, that Nick re-edited it into a million little pieces that ultimately half of which got lost and misplaced. So it was a mess.
Can I say he lived in my house in Berkeley when a lot of this was going on? So I just want to ask you, it seems like there's a narration here where there's different stuff that's been added to the narration that's just brilliant and really puts it, and also in the documentary, isn't there a multiple screen sequence that isn't in the film that's also quite brilliant?
Right, to tell you the truth, I edited that because I restored it digitally. We wanted to see what it would look like if we used digital images to match the multiple image. Some people felt that it was too cold. It didn't have the texture and the feel of analog film, so they decided not to do that.
Can you answer about that narration? Though, weren't there more elements of him that became
a lot
kind
of
of
narration.
thing?
That's a very good question about the narration. In the documentary, I said I wanted to make a new film. It wasn't just me; it was all of us talking about making a film. But that was different. That used a lot, Nick recorded a lot of narration. And we wanted to flood this film with narration. And we couldn't because of the restrictions on how we could restore this film. So we had to choose just a few lines from his narration, and we have a lot of narration from him in the archive.
I just want to say that he's a better character in this version than he is in all the fragmented versions I saw. So whatever that was very judicious, because you created a character that didn't work all the way for him, but many times, or burnished it.
Let me just say that I'm glad to hear you say created a character, because one of the discussions that I've been having with people about this film is that I consider it a fiction film. I don't consider it a documentary at all. And I consider Nick in the film to be a character. That's not him. He didn't need to be put up in that house with the barn. He'd been paying the rent on it for, what, a year or longer? He'd been living there. None of that's real. That's all staged sequences which make it a story of sorts. I can't think of anything in this that is, except for the Chicago stuff and things like that, that's documentary footage.
I don't know. I think you're overlooking something, and I say this, respectfully.
Yeah.
You're overlooking the fact that Nick took a lot of what he wanted to dramatize out of our own lives. So in a way, he liked the idea of being a part of his, making a film that was about real people in a real time. And this film inhabits that era, or those few years, and that's what he was interested in doing. So I think he's combining two forms, at least.
When Tom's shaving his beard, which is something he was going to do anyway, it's a stage scene. He waited. He made him wait until he was too itchy.
Sure.
And then he did it. When Leslie came in and told the story about the pimp, he let her tell him to a little bit, tell the bare bones, then he had the camera set up and filmed her. Then he refilmed her later. That's what I mean by not a documentary. When you make a documentary, somebody once asked him, the Kaye, a silly question about Savage Innocence. They said, well, how does it compare to Nanook of the North? And he said, well, Nanook of the North is a documentary. This is Savage Innocence is except Savage Innocence is a fairy tale. And Nanook was a little staged too, I know. But if you want to see a documentary, go look at Nanook of the North.
Well, for me, looking at it, it's sort of a weird time warp, like a time capsule of an era when we were all going through so much, and we were all so awkward, and seeing Nick as being such a father figure to us, just as a viewer, what really struck me when I saw this at the New York Film Festival was that there was that one sequence that I thought was actually quite brilliant, that I never realized how good it was, which you made reference to, was the scene where basically that Nick betrays Leslie and he has everybody throw tomatoes at her, which I thought, it reminded me of the thing that he always said, because he truly believed that adults were the betrayers of the youth, and I could see it so beautifully demonstrated in that scene that I never had experienced before watching the film when I was working on it. But being so attached, 40 years later, I could go, wow, that's probably the most powerful scene in the film.
And he realizes that he can't, he doesn't belong there anymore. He's still trying to make the film, and everybody else is kind of moving on. And Tom is sick of being filmed. And those close-ups of him just responding, saying, "Better go get him."
Yeah, and I like the line. I like the line. Yeah. I like the line when he says the only way we're going to survive is if we take care of each other. Which is great Marxist line against alienation. And it's true, you know?
It's also, just so you know, I mean, that last scene in the barn is the deserted mansion scene in Rebel Without a Cause. I assume everybody got that. That's why you were wearing a red T-shirt.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah.
No, but it's great if generations reach out to each other and you know, and try to understand each other.
But in Rebel Without a Cause, James Dean and Natalie Wood go off to Spoon and leave Salaminio alone. But in this, they come back and put a blanket on him. Big change. You know, that's what take care of each other means. It's like rewriting the end of his signature film in that with a you know, a more loving ending. Yeah.
What I carry away from this is that there's a lot of non sequitur humor in it that made me laugh a lot. The dropped threads, the intentionally dropped threads, what were you saying? Or what, you know, what would, I don't understand what you were saying. You hear that again and again, that line. And there's a sense of intentional cut-up, the Brian Geisen, William Burroughs type of cut-up technique that he's using in order to elicit kind of a lot of, you know, different angles and drop threads and convergences coming back again and again. And that's really humorous to me. I wonder if that was any of the upfront intent. Was that discussed at all when the film was being made? Was that at all part of the purpose, that there would be these non sequiturs all over the place?
Well, Nick wrote some of these scenes. I mean, these were not, you know, all just let's go make a movie. I mean, he wrote these scenes out before they were performed. But in looking at the film myself recently, I realized that there are a lot of funny scenes in this film. I mean, you know, the cauliflower and the ice cream, and you know, and the nakedness of Leslie and that. The what?
Put some pants on running.
Yeah, to put the pants on, the whole. But also that film is it can be an explosive experience that can, you know, we can break new grounds with different forms of films. That we don't have to be stuck with one frame, you know, all the time, and that we really haven't, you know, advanced all that much. And I think that this film, you know, is not finished, but I think it points the way. And for some people, I think it's gonna. I think it does that, and it's very gratifying to have been lucky enough, you know, me, a poor schlumpy little Jewish kid from New York, you know, meeting Nick Ray and being able to work on this. What? It was something to work with a guy who really was a wonderful man. He was a very kind man, really, and all the stuff that we say about how off, you know, how addicted he was or whatever. He loved us, and you know, we loved him, and that's really why I think Nick Ray always said, you know, when you see a star, you know, there's a reason a lot of the time that they're a star, you know, and Nick was a star. He was. Some people think he's the greatest filmmaker of all time. I don't know, but he's showing us a lot with this film.
You should read it.
By the way, for the students in the audience, Nick didn't assign any homework, but he did assign 2 books for us. So I want you to go home and read them tonight, okay? Bergson's Essay on Laughter and The Myth of Sisyphus.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
By Camus. And he also liked the film with Charles Lawton, where he plays a butler. No.
Ruggles of Red Gap.
Ruggles of Red Gap. You like that?
Leo McCarran.